welcome to this segment of Summer Solutions. With me, Max Keiser, Stacey, Herbert, and our guest, Tyson Slocum. Welcome.
Great to be here.
All righty. Welcome.
So this is Summer Solutions, and we're looking, you're the energy guy. We have an energy president. Everybody thought George Bush was the energy president, but this guy, Trump, is like back to the Stone Age sort of energy, coal, probably whale oil soon, I would think. He promised to make coal great again. Is he doing that?
No, because there's nothing that Trump can do to make coal great again. Coal is dying a slow death because it's been outcompeted in the marketplace by cheap fracked natural gas, by the rise of renewables, because the declining cost curve of renewable deployment just continues to go down, and continued energy efficiency in the United States. If you've got a smaller market to sell into, then coal's slice of the pie is just going to get smaller and smaller as it gets outcompeted. So this is really just kind of an electoral strategy to try to appeal to disaffected whites in the very big coal belt of the United States to continue to promise them something that he can't possibly deliver. So it's a really cynical ploy. None of the big industries in the energy sector, electric utilities, any of these guys are applauding a revival in coal or pushing for this. So what Trump is doing isn't even supported by some of the biggest corporations operating in the energy space.
What is clean coal?
Well, clean coal doesn't really exist very well. There's one facility that's been under construction for years in Mississippi called Kemper, being built primarily by Southern Company, a big utility there in Mississippi, with several $100 million in taxpayer assistance from the Department of Energy. And it's a colossal failure. Billions of dollars over budget, years behind schedule, and it still isn't producing electricity. The concept behind clean coal is let's, instead of, spewing the emissions in a smokestack up into the atmosphere, we're going to trap the CO2 greenhouse gas emissions and inject it into the ground and permanently store it there, or maybe pipe it to a mature oil field and pump the gas in there for what's known as enhanced oil recovery. But the fact of the matter is that it is colossally expensive. And it would be one thing if there were no other clean energy alternatives available. But a brand new combined cycle natural gas power plant, you can be online in less than 2 years. It's going to cost you under $1 billion. And it's got a really favorable emissions profile compared to coal.
So it's just an Orwellian term.
Absolutely.
Clean coal.
Yeah. Clean coal doesn't exist. It's a marketing term that the coal industry came up with. You're going to see a big revival of it in terms of efforts to direct taxpayer resources to fund some of these boondoggles.
Yeah, sequestration is the term used
exactly.
to put it back. Or another, they could turn it into printer cartridge ink.
They could do that.
Right.
Or I could drink my delicious Coca-Cola with the bubbly emissions from a power plant. That sounds pretty delicious.
Oh, boy.
Is that true? Or are you just making that up?
No, CO2, this is industrial waste CO2. So you definitely don't want to inject that into a beverage that you're going to be consuming.
You never know if you offer it at a discount at Walmart.
Well, maybe they won't. They'll first sell it in India or something like that.
Right.
Do a trial run.
Yeah.
Right. See how many farmers kill themselves.
Exactly.
But you mentioned subsidies for these sequestration boondoggles. But what about coal? So Trump does want to make America make coal great again. You've established that the market itself has destroyed the coal industry. The propaganda and the rhetoric out of much of the right wing is that it's somehow Birkenstock-wearing hippies that caused the destruction of coal, not the price of natural gas and the ease of building a natural gas plant. Mm-hmm. So you have this Perry memo. If you could explain what Rick Perry, how he's involved in this, and is his solution to throw taxpayer money essentially at helping coal exist?
Right. So Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, and now the Secretary of Energy, in April of 2017, he wrote a memo directing his chief of staff to write a study to examine whether or not cheap renewable energy is unfairly causing baseload generation, coal, nuclear, and natural gas, to be uneconomic, and whether or not corrective actions need to be taken in how our wholesale electric power markets are structured and regulated to account for the unfair advantage that renewables have been granted. And I see this Perry memo as actually a very dangerous incursion into the efficient operation of wholesale energy markets. Now, the Secretary of Energy actually has very limited legal authority to do anything in wholesale markets. The only way they can do something is if the President of the United States declares a national emergency and the Secretary of Energy has some emergency powers. I don't put anything past Trump. He could do that. But a much easier path is to delegate this to an independent federal agency called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So this is one of the many independent agencies like the Securities and Exchange Commission, like the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, where the president appoints 5 members, the Senate confirms them, but then once those members are appointed, they serve a set term and do not serve at the pleasure of the president. So like Rick Perry, the Secretary of Energy, or Scott Pruitt, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, these are cabinet level officials that are hired and fired by the president. The chairperson of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission can't just be fired by the president.
And so, this is called FERC.
FERC, exactly. And so what my fear is that Trump is going to do a Comey here because he hasn't named a chairperson of FERC yet.
At the point that we're recording this. We are pre-recording this by a little bit. But,
right. But I'm not sure that we're going to see it for a while.
Really?
Because
in 2017?
We might not. Because what I think is going on is Trump is making sure that he is going to secure a loyalty pledge out of the chair of FERC to say, you need to be in line with our new radical vision of how wholesale power markets. So
what's the radical vision for the wholesale?
So the radical vision is to redesign power markets to provide additional, what's known as out-of-market payments to baseload generation, because what the Perry memo is trying to say is the free market in electricity in the United States is not assigning a proper value to the benefits that baseload generation provides for reliability.
Explain baseload. Baseload is like the coal and nuclear powered plants. And then you have the natural gas and the renewable plants. What's the difference in how fast and slow they can start?
Right. So what baseload refers to is what is the minimum amount of electricity that you need to operate in a given day. So the electricity demand, say, at 3 a.m. is going to be about half of what it is at 3 p.m. Mm-hmm. And so your 3 a.m. benchmark is your baseload amount. So you've got some power plants that are going to be operating 24 hours a day, churning out electricity to meet that baseload amount. And then the rest is peaker. So traditionally that was natural gas, but now because natural gas prices are actually cheaper than coal, we've seen natural gas become baseload. So nuclear, coal, and increasingly natural gas serve as baseload, whereas the peakers are increasingly renewable energy. And one of the happy coincidences is that solar capacity is at its greatest during peak hours of demand. So solar actually can play a very big role. And of course, the big thing is once energy storage technologies, continue to mature and decline in price, energy storage is going to balance out the intermittency of these renewables and really make these other baseload units irrelevant.
But the baseload, I read your article and all your Perry memo stuff about this. So the baseload, the coal and nuclear power, it's not like you just go turn on and off, just like you can with the natural gas. You could just easily flip on the switch and turn it off. These take a long time to heat up and go down. You can't just...
They do, yeah. So you don't typically turn these power plants on and off, especially with a nuclear power plant. You've got pretty big lead times. Yeah. You don't just turn off a controlled nuclear reaction. So this is the danger I see is Trump is trying to re-engineer wholesale power markets to give huge ratepayer subsidies to increasingly uneconomic nuclear, coal, and in some markets, even natural gas. It's amazing, but in California, where renewables are sometimes have 50% penetration, they're driving wholesale power prices at some points close to zero, right? And so even cheap natural gas is having a hard time competing when you've got a whole bunch of renewables unleashed onto the grid. And so this is freaking out the Trumpies. And so they're coming up with this new plan to try and create billions and billions of dollars in subsidies to bail out some of these baseload operations. We've seen a few states like New York and Illinois pursue some limited bailouts of inefficient baseload. But the Perry memo would put this on steroids.
Okay, so the Perry memo is saying that the government is subsidizing renewables, and they want some subsidization for coal.
That is absolutely correct.
Yeah, the government is subsidizing renewables because they're trying to change course from coal, which is cost, if you were to calculate all the environmental costs, completely non-competitive.
Absolutely. The externalities.
The externalities are incredibly expensive. So the government steps in. The government steps in sometimes. They stepped in during World War II. They stepped in to build the highways under Eisenhower. They stepped in to put a man on the moon. Sometimes the government steps in.
I like it when the government steps in.
Because the people want to have an environmentally sound economy and country.
Absolutely.
So Rick Perry, does he understand the role of government?
I don't think any of Trump's team really understands the role of government. I don't think there's a lot that they understand.
Okay, well, that's an important thing to understand, is that they are running the government, and yet they don't really have any familiarity with the role of government in a country like the United States.
I do want to mention Rick Perry famously stood up on the platform there against all those other Republicans when he was running for to be the nominee for the Republican Party. He said he would get rid of all the government agencies, like 5 of them, and he could only name one. He could not name the Department of Energy. He didn't know that was a department, and now he's head of it. So just so you know.
It's pretty outrageous. And Rick Perry has never been known for his intellectual heft, but he's got some staffers that some of them worked for some of these front groups for the fossil fuel industry that are going to be writing this report. And
all
so
right,
it's
Tyson,
something
we
that we're watching.
got to cut it off there. Hopefully you can stay for another segment.
Absolutely.
All right, stay tuned for the second half. A lot more coming your way. Welcome back to Summer Solutions with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert, and our guest Tyson Slocum. He's over there he's the director of the Public Citizens Energy Program here in Washington, D.C. He's a big shot over here. Pretty good. All right, Tyson, welcome back.
Great to be here.
So we're talking about energy. We're talking about Rick Perry. I try to get you to release a Christmas album in the style of Perry Como, but calling it the Perry Memo. Because apparently Rick Pemo, forget, let's move on. All right, so Tyson Slocum, Donald Trump was pulled out of the Paris Agreement. Is this a big deal?
It is a big deal because Trump is now aligning himself with 3 countries, North Korea, Nicaragua, and Syria, as the only countries not to sign on to the Paris Climate Agreement. One thing that we've got to understand about the Paris Climate Agreement is that it actually was incredibly modest, and it was all voluntary.
Why pull out of it? Who cares? It's a piece of garbage anyway.
Because Trump is all about destructive symbolism, and he wants to destroy all of these multilateral institutions for this absurd premise of America
was
first.
Fake symbolism. It was make a bunch of liberals feel good, go hug a tree, sign a piece of paper. It's meaningless. Why not pull out? You know, it's meaningless. He gets a nice bump in his ratings, and he can always do some other climate deal. He can do his own climate deal. He can do something else. He doesn't need to be a part of this talking shop.
The thing about the Paris Climate Agreement is that it got the entire world on the same page about the direction we needed to go to agree to curtail greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector.
Big frickin' deal. That's such a boring snooze fest. No one's taking action. No one's got the power to take any action. It's just a big empty can of worms.
No, the Paris Agreement replaced Kyoto, right?
Correct.
And Kyoto did have basically measures by which you could force the nations to actually do what they were supposed to do.
You're absolutely right.
This is all voluntary. Nicaragua, by the way, did not sign it because it was a step down from Kyoto. So to say that, now the U.S. is in the company of Nicaragua said it's a fake agreement, as Max is saying.
Yeah, and you knew that, Tyson. You're being disingenuous. You're talking the book here.
I was saying we joined the company. I didn't give Nicaragua's reasons for not endorsing it.
Which is
We're
the
in
same
DC.
as misinformation.
Well, but the thing is, having this, and you're absolutely right, that Paris was the first step. The next step was going to be the binding agreement part.
Oh.
So Paris was a step in the right direction. Global climate change requires a global solution. Paris is not perfect, but withdrawing from it just removes U.S. leadership.
There's no leadership. If you have a bunch of non-leaders talking about nothing, there's no leadership. I mean, this opens the possibility for a leader to step forward,
But remember that the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement coincided with Donald Trump's evisceration of our domestic regulatory agenda to control greenhouse gas emissions.
So the bit we talked about in the first half.
Right. So, but also through what's known as the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Power Plan, which was
you got rid of that. See,
right.
The U.S. news doesn't cover any of this stuff because it's all Russiagate, Russiagate, Russiagate. So nobody knows anything about what's going on with all the other parts of our economy and our political system.
Absolutely.
I haven't heard of that. I hadn't heard of this. So what did he do? What did he get rid of at
the
EPA?
The real scandal here are the radical policy moves that Trump is making, particularly on energy and climate. So back in 2015, Barack Obama announced that the Environmental Protection Agency was going to start regulating greenhouse gas emissions from power plants for the first time in history. This followed up on a rule where we started to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from tailpipe emissions from automobiles. And all of this stems from a 2007 Supreme Court decision called Massachusetts versus EPA, where a bunch of states said, hey, we're feeling the effects of climate change. EPA, you need to regulate it under your existing Clean Air Act authority. And the John Roberts Court, in a 5-4 decision, said the EPA must regulate greenhouse gas emissions as a pollutant. So the Obama administration did it, and Trump just completely threw it out the door.
So basically violating the Supreme Court decision?
So they have to come up with a replacement, but he can slow walk that for years. I mean, creating a rule to implement a law from a regulatory agency like the Environmental Protection Agency, it will take years. And so he's just going to slow walk it and not do anything on it. Some entities, environmental groups or states can sue to try and prod the Trump administration to move faster, but that litigation will take years.
So we're summer solutions, the Paris Agreement, we're pulled out. Some states, you mentioned states and cities are actually coming up with their own solutions. Tell us some of those.
You're absolutely right. And so what you're seeing is more than 1,000 entities across the United States, hundreds and hundreds of municipalities, dozens of states are saying, if the federal government isn't going to lead, we're going to step into that vacuum. And so the big leaders here are California and New York that have established very aggressive, in the case of California, greenhouse gas emissions regulations. They've got super robust programs that are funding renewable energy deployment. Same thing in New York, where they've got a 50% renewable energy target. In California, they're actually debating 100% renewable energy. Then you've got hundreds of cities across the country that are taking all sorts of concrete actions to either green up their electric sector or promote electric vehicle infrastructure. And I know EVs aren't 100% perfect, but the electrification of the transportation sector is a key if we're going to move beyond oil, especially if the electricity generated to power the batteries in our transportation sector are coming from renewable energy.
Well, in the U.S., you have this power struggle between the states and the federal government, and many times, of course, the federal government says we're going to throw it to the states. That's a phrase that you hear, right? Mm-hmm. So it looks like that's what's happening, and why is that a bad thing?
It would be better if we had a coherent national energy policy.
But we don't, and these states are stepping up, and they're doing concrete stuff, which sounds a lot better than having a global institution just talk about the situation and not do anything. Okay, these states, like New York and California, they're very powerful states, and they're actually stepping up, and they have the wherewithal and the money and the technology to do stuff. And why not do stuff? They're doing stuff, and this, the California is like the 8th biggest economy in the world, or something like that. It's in the top.
I think it might be the 5th.
It's definitely in the top 10. I mean, it's a huge economy. The island of Manhattan has almost the same GDP as Great Britain, within half a trillion or so. So, I mean, why not just the states do it? I mean, what's the big? So what? Trump sucks on his policies. The states do it.
Definitely having states go it alone or collaborate together within regions. There's going to be benefits from that. But then there's going to be states like Mississippi and Texas that aren't going to do things. And the thing about
but if they're creating jobs, let's say in the solar industry, it's a job booster. And California generates tens of thousands of jobs. New York, tens of thousands of jobs. California is going to have a lot of jobs. I don't know where Nevada is on this, but they got a lot of desert, obviously. If they go solar, they're going to get a lot of jobs. And Texas, and folks in Texas are going to say, your ideology sucks. We want a job. There's solar jobs. You're out of office. We're going to bring in folks to do what California's doing. Isn't that the way democracy works in America?
It is. And the states, it is going to be effective. But it would be more effective if we had
but if wishes were knishes, we'd all be fat. I mean, it just doesn't, it's sloppy, right? But
the thing I like about what Max is saying here is that we need a lot of innovation and diversity. And I think having experiments, San Diego is trying to go 100% renewable with their own plan. Their plan is different from Portland's plan. And I think that the fact that you can experiment and see what works and what doesn't work, I think we might have find better ideas than one guy and one committee here in D.C. saying, how about we make them do this?
It's competition.
Yeah.
It's free market competition. And if a state or a city goes completely energy renewable and the cost of their energy drops precipitously, you're going to have people migrating to that state.
Exactly.
Because they say, I pay a lot for Obamacare, I don't want to cut on my energy costs. I'm going to move from this state, I'm going to move to that state. I mean, that's happened in America time and time again. People move around. It's very mobile. That's one of the beauties of it. It's not like Europe where you have different cultures, different passports, different, governments, different paperwork. It's just one big frickin' 330 million entrepreneurs waiting to go to the next idea. So let competition rule.
Well, you are right in that we're going to see a whole lot of different types of policies being promoted at the municipal and the state level, and that's a good thing. But again,
but you're just talking because you're in Washington and you're a bureaucrat and you're over there at this institute and you want a job? I mean, why not?
No, my job is not dependent upon only working on federal issues. So
now I think you mentioned, I thought destructive symbolism was a good word, because I think that that fake symbolism, this whole sort of virtue signaling of these Paris Agreement sort of things, where a lot of liberals, and I count myself as a liberal, is like they feel like, look how great I am. I support Obama signing this meaningless, non-binding contract, and now I feel good about myself, and I'm going to get in my car or my private jet and fly everywhere and do everything. But I think the fact that he's like forced this issue and people to confront the reality of what we are doing and how little meaning it actually had in the first place, and forcing actual real reaction on the ground, which is real change.
Right. And I don't mean to be, insulting by saying that you're just being, self-preservation in your view. But I mean, wouldn't it be so that you would have a bit of a bias in terms of thinking that there is a top-down government approach, a solution that you would reach for automatically, instead of a more diversified, competitive approach on the ground, right?
When you looked at the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Power Plan proposal, which was to regulate greenhouse gas emissions, it did not set a single standard. Okay. It basically developed a 50-state standard. It said, here are the emission reduction goals that, Mississippi, California have, and you have 4 different ways to address that. And you can do a mix and match. You can try to make existing coal plants more efficient. You can bring more natural gas into the market. You can deploy more renewables, and you can invest in energy efficiency. And so the thing is, the federal approach under Obama wasn't this one-size-fits-all, D.C. is going to, ram down the state's throats, one solution. It gave a ton of flexibility. And so getting rid of that kind of national flexible approach, yes, you're right. There's going to be a whole bunch of states that are going to be pursuing stuff. There's going to be competition there, and that's going to be a good thing. But then you're going to have Neanderthal states that are controlled through the economic politics of the incumbent electric utility.
Yeah, but you got to let evolution evolve, man. You got to let the gene pool improve on its own accord. The government can't be out there having sex with every single American.
But
they got to have sex by themselves, generate smart babies or dead babies, either smart babies or dead babies.
But
how is that a solution to the energy situation?
Because you're gravitating toward the light, and energy is light, and the plants gravitate toward the trueness of the light. They don't stay in the forest in the shadow, or they die. So if Texas wants to be a Neanderthal and stay under the clouded forest canopy of stupidity, they're going to perish. Along with Perry. His name is Perish with Perry.
Okay.
All right, and I still think you should do a Christmas album with Perry Como songs.
I don't think we're gonna have a lot of sales.
Talk to your wife; she says she's all for it.
She should be singing.
All right, that's it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Perry Como. Now, Tyson Slocum. He's the bigwig over there at the Public Citizens Energy Program, which is the shop that used to be run by
Ralph Nader.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, remember him? All right, well, stay tuned for the next episode. You can catch us on Twitter at Keiser Report. Until then, bye, y'all.